In video 8, we are going to talk about parallel lines cut by a transversal and the types of angles formed. So go ahead and have your geo book out to take notes. Our first vocab word for today is transversal. By definition, a line that passes through two lines at two distinct points. A transversal establishes whether two lines are parallel. So my transversal is right here in red, this red line right here. All a transversal is a line that crosses parallel lines. I have my transversal line L crossing my parallel lines M and N. Go ahead and pause the video and copy the definition. Now we're going to talk about corresponding angles, and these angles are formed when my transversal, so the line in red, intersects my parallel lines, the two blue lines. Corresponding angles are the pairs of angles in matching corners. These angles are congruent, so make sure to jot that down when you're copying the definition. I have that angle 1 and angle 5. They're in matching corners. Those two angles are congruent. Congruent. Angles that have the same measure. We also have that angle 4 and angle 8 are corresponding angles. So those two angles are congruent. Angle 2 and angle 6 are in the same matching corner. Those two angles are congruent. And lastly, we have that angle 3 and angle 7 are corresponding angles. So those two angles are congruent. They have the same angle measurement. Go ahead and pause the video and copy the definition. Okay, in order to identify other angles formed by a transversal, this line that's crossing the two parallel lines, we need to understand the meaning of interior and exterior angles. Interior angles means between the parallel lines. So these angles here, I have angle C, D, E, and F. Those angles are between my two parallel lines. Those are interior angles. Exterior means outside the parallel lines. Those angles would be angle A, B, G, and H. Please pause the video and take down the notes. For our next vocab word, we're going to be looking at alternating angles. These angles are congruent. We are going to be using the diagram and the pictures on the diagram to help identify these types of angles. First, let's look at alternate interior angles. Alternate interior. The pair of angles on opposite sides of the transversal, but inside the parallel lines. Alternate interior. So our first example of alternate interior, let's start with the angles with the happy face. Angle 4 and angle 6 are alternate interior angles. Those angles are congruent. So those are alternate interior because we have our transversal in red. And those two angles are on opposite sides of the transversal, but on the inside of the parallel lines, my two blue lines. To help us identify where these angles are located, we use the z-test or the z-rule. So if we can imagine that my parallel line here with the transversal and the parallel line here. So it's forming a Z right here. My two congruent angles are the angles that form the letter Z. So the angles that form the letter Z. The second pair of alternate interior angles would be angle 3 and angle 5. Those two angles are congruent. They are located on the inside of the parallel lines. So they are on the interior and on opposite sides of the transversal. Now let's move on to alternate exterior angles. And alternate exterior are the pairs of angles on opposite sides of the transversal, but outside the parallel lines. The first example would be angle 1 and angle 7. Those two angles are congruent. They have the same measure. So they are located on the outside of the parallel lines and on opposite sides of the transversal. So they're on opposite sides of the transversal. My angle 1 and angle 7. My second pair of alternate exterior angles is angle 2 and angle 8. Again, they are on the outside of the parallel lines. That's why they're alternate exterior and on opposite sides of the transversal. My transversal being the red line cutting through my parallel lines. Go ahead and pause and take down the notes. Lastly, let's go ahead and look at same side interior angles. And these again are angles that are formed by a transversal. So a line that cuts through parallel lines. Let's look at the definition. The pairs of angles on the same side of the transversal, but inside the parallel lines. So also these angles, so make sure you write this down as well, are supplementary. These angles add up to 180 degrees. For my first example, I have that measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 6 equals 180. So 3 and 6 are my same side interior angles. They're on the same side of the transversal, on the inside of the parallel lines. My second example would be angle 4 and 5. They're on the same side of the transversal and on the inside of the parallel lines. That's why same side interior. Please pause and take down the notes. To conclude this video, I would like to mention ways in which we use parallel lines and transversals in everyday life, and that would be in the construction of roads, highways, and buildings. For example, deciding where the exact routes for city streets will be, including where they will cross, requires a knowledge of parallel lines and transversals.